questions about Fabric, the customer advisory team. We will start with a few questions from Jean-Pierre and I, and then the audience will be able to ask questions as well. And also we will take some questions from YouTube if there are any. Okay? Cool. So we would like to start with a basic introduction, like who are you and what do you do in the Fabric customer advisory team?
Cool, thanks Tristan, and thanks for coming out tonight. It's very cold. It's very nice to be here. I've come a long way. I've pretty much travelled from the other side of the planet just for this session tonight. No, I've got another couple of events coming up over the next few weeks, but I jumped at the opportunity to come to a user group like this, so really happy to be here. Introduction, so my name is Philip Seamark, so I've come from New Zealand. Please let me know if I'm speaking too quickly, because I have a habit of that, especially when I get excited about DAX and data modeling, so just tell me to slow down.
Okay.
So I work for Microsoft, and I work on a team that's now called Azure Cat.
Okay.
The last week was my 6-year anniversary at Microsoft, and I started on a team called Power BI Cat that only had about 5 or 6 people. But in my eyes, they were legends. Well, they still are legends. This is, everyone's probably familiar with Adam Saxton and Patrick LeBlanc, the guys in the cube, who I'm very good friends with. I actually forget how famous they are because we sort of get along as friends, and then we go to a community event and they cannot walk from one side of the room to the other without being stopped and having to do selfies, and so they're very, very, very famous. Casper de Jong, who's from this part of the world as well, just up the road in the Netherlands, plus a few others. So that was 6 years ago, and Power BI was quite small then. I was actually quite surprised how many people used it 6 years ago, and what's happened since then is the usage numbers have just kept going up and up and up and up and up. But back in those days, it was a very small team, and everyone did the same thing. But as the product became more popular and more people used it, our team grew, which was natural, and we sort of formed into different areas of speciality. So the team was cut in half, and half the team became generalists. So they didn't go particularly deep on any individual topic, but they knew the product across the, they knew the broad product. And the other half became specialists. So I was fortunate enough to become a specialist. I became a specialist in DAX, mostly because no one else wanted to do DAX. One of the things I was quite surprised about, actually, before I started at Microsoft, when I was interviewing, I was quite nervous because I just assumed everyone on the CAT team were expert in DAX. You know, I thought I was pretty good, but I just assumed everyone was a lot better than me, and I was quite nervous when the 6 interviews came along that I was going to get really hard questions about DAX. But just between us, just don't tell anyone. What it turned out that pretty much most of the guys on my team, they don't know DAX. I was quite surprised, a little disappointed, but so when it came time to pick a speciality, it was pretty easy for me. I chose DAX along with that data modeling, and I really enjoyed it, and that's what I've been doing since. So what typically happens is our team engages with large enterprise customers, think multinationals, the S500 or the Fortune 500 type customers, most of whom use Power BI in some shape or form. But because they're big organizations, they have a lot of data, they have a lot of users, and generally when you mix those things together, often you build a Power BI report and it doesn't necessarily go fast straight away. So they'll contact their generalist, which might be someone like Adam Saxton and Patrick LeBlanc, and they'll triage the request, and then they'll pull in a specialist as need. So if they want help trying to make a report run faster, they'll get in touch with me. If they want help with security, they'll get one of our other specialists who can go quite deep. So that's what I typically do. So in my role, I will always come in as the last line of defence. If a big customer's really struggling with how do we really make this model run as fast as we possibly can get it, or I get the opportunity to work on, which I really enjoy. So hopefully that's a sort of gives you an indication or an idea about where I fit in the CAT team.
Yes. So definitely an elite team working with big customers who have problems, questions, and concerns. And as you said, you were exposed to a lot of big companies, and what are their biggest requirements, questions, and concerns? For example, now we are moving from Power BI to Fabric. There is this shift from P to F. What are the biggest concerns or the most important questions that they ask nowadays to the CAT, customer advisory team?
It's quite broad. Fabric is a big area. So there are questions about a lot of elements. And I think one of the big things still, even with us, actually, there's just so much to learn. Now Fabric is a very broad product. It has many engines, and it's impossible to even be semi-expert in all of them. So I think a lot of people are, at the moment, feeling their way. They're quite overwhelmed, and they're really looking for help and guidance. And what should we be doing to get the best out of it? Because it's not a small investment. When you buy Fabric capacities or multiple capacities, you want to make sure that you're getting the best out of it. So they look for help from us, from the community, from their own experts to just try and what is the best approach, especially when you're talking about taking something that has been running for a number of years. How do you migrate that in a way that you're not going to upset your users? Brand new products, brand new projects are a lot easier, but I think at the moment is really it's still very new to a lot of people.
Yes.
I mean, I have to admit, I'd never written a Python notebook until up to about 1.5 years ago, and now I probably do one every day. I'm always in it, doing things in there, and I think a lot of people are finding new things they're doing if they've had the opportunity to get access to Fabric that they wouldn't have done before. So there's a lot to learn.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Yes, and we believe, and all the discussion we have internally at the Club Fabric, Club Power BI, but also with customers or people in the community, are the same vision. So at the end, people will use the book, will use the other things. But when we start the discussion, there's that, and I think again you could just tackle this point on the last video. It's how can I say Power BI is not Fabric, or I just want Power BI.
Sure.
We had that conversation there during the meetup. I as a client, I just want Power BI. How do you deal with that point with customers or internally at Microsoft?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's a bit like Office. Perhaps I have always been using Excel, and I'm only interested in Excel, and then I get Office, which comes with Word and PowerPoint and email. Perhaps I'm not interested in them. I just want to use Excel. I don't need the other things. Well, I mean, in some ways, you don't have to use those other products. You're not forced to use them. So if you've been using Power BI for 5, 6, 9, I think we might even be coming up 10-year anniversary soon with Power BI. You can continue to just use Power BI the way it is. But I think you'll find is when you get the opportunity to use some things in Fabric, like at the very basic, using a notebook and using a Python library that we're growing and developing called Semantic Labs, you'll probably start falling in love very quickly with some of the elements. I get the confusion, like why do we need to have all of these other things? And a lot of admins are concerned that if we make it available to users, what are they going to do? Are they going to do some crazy things in Spark and create pipelines and overwhelm my capacity? And my Power BI users who just want to load the report, they're having trouble because someone over here is experimenting and trying to find their way. So I get that, and I think we've got some things coming up to multiple things that can help with that. But it's a business decision that I'm not involved with. But I think you'll find that even just some of the extra things you get with Fabric will easily justify the cost, and you can still keep it turned off for now. So,
and you can start with very low capacities with just F2 which is a few bucks per month. You can have all the features, maybe except Copilot, but you can start a notebook on a very small capacity and play with it. So it's quite accessible there.
Yeah, if you've got a small business, you can run. You've got everything you need end to end to do all your reporting, all your warehousing, everything can just come in that F2 box.
Yes. Yes.
And then as you grow, well, then you can bump it up to an F4, F8, etc. So that's pretty cool.
Yes.
So
Yes. Maybe you have one question, but the Fabric team.
The next topic was about data modeling and DAX, but maybe we can take a question from the audience.
About capacity, I've got one question over capacity, because maybe thanks to Cloud Fabric, in autumn we started selling several projects for our clients, not only for Power BI but for Fabric as well. Because before we had the usual workout, we are just making a SQL database on Azure and Microsoft Fabric or Microsoft Power BI to visualize this data.
Yes.
And now, as we have these trial capacities, and if I'm not mistaken, if F32, 64 even, yeah. So that's a trial capacity, and we have several clients working on these trial capacities. But they are small businesses, SME, and if we switch to these paid capacities, for example, F2, F4, if we're working with Azure SQL and Power BI, we can easily switch just the power of database, just to make it more powerful. As for the capacity of data warehouse in Fabric capacity, because we can evaluate the data transformations easily with this application, Microsoft Fabric Cost.
The Fabric capacity metrics app.
Yes. Fabric capacity metrics, yeah.
So what is the question?
The question is, how can we evaluate the power of database in Fabric capacity?
So you want to estimate your Fabric capacity size?
Yes.
That is the question.
And that is the question. Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of storage.
Storage and compute, I guess. Because storage, well, we will explain a bit later how it works, but yeah, okay. Jean-Pierre, you want to take this one?
Or Phil?
no, I don't mind. A funny story about the capacity metrics app, actually.
I have.
I'll come back to that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, maybe you want to.
No. Just remind me to tell you a funny story about the capacity metrics
that's
app.
a funny story. But the answer, maybe because there's multiple answer to that, but 20 years ago, when you had to buy a server just to run SQL Server and your BI workload or whatever, you have to choose between 8 processor, 4 processor, dual processor, or whatever. What was the metric to do that? You make some tests, you make some abacus to find, and then you make a decision, and after you learn that it was too high or too low. So it's the same, but the difference, you don't have to wait for 6 weeks or 6 months to get your capacity. You just scale up, scale down. So for me, the keyword is capacity planning, and it's something that it's new with Fabric. It exists. I do IT for 25 years, and I have always heard capacity planning is the key for manage your infrastructure. So it's exactly the same, but you can do it in one day. You can test a lot of things. You don't have to pay to. You pay if you, for example, if you want to test F2048, you have to pay it for 1 hour or 2 hours. But you can just stop at the end of the day and you make your decision. So for me, the key is capacity planning, and we need to do some capacity planning. It's not because it's in the cloud or it's pay as you go or whatever. Every IT guy need to make some capacity planning. So it's for me, it's the answer. But maybe you have things to add to that, or maybe Tristan?
Phil, go ahead.
And after we can go to the funny part of that.
Because this is not a funny question.
Yeah, I see. Because it's all about money, so everyone's got upset. If it's more
Yeah.
than-
It is difficult to size. Just because your business has a similar number of employees, their usage is not necessarily the same as the next business with a similar number of employees. It's how you use it, which compute engines are you doing, what kind of processing you're doing. Copilot starts to make interesting, is interesting to the mix too. You really just need to experiment, approach it in a pragmatic, sensible way, and you quickly, because you don't want to be under, pick something too small, but you also don't want to pick anything that's too large. I think having a capacity that's underutilized is just as bad as one that's overutilized. So really is finding that sweet spot and watching it and growing it or adding as required. Hopefully you do get the opportunity to add more capacities and make them larger as well. So
Just to add on this topic, as you said, you have access to free trials. So you can start Fabric for free with F64. What we do at our clients is that we do some proof of concept, some tests on several workloads, and then thanks to the Fabric Capacity Metrics app, we can see the capacity units consumed by each workload. Based on that, you can make some predictions and some simulations in order to try to figure out what will be the actual consumption in the future if we do 3 times more compute and stuff like that. I also think that in the next 6-12 months, there will be some companies, some ISVs who will build custom solutions on top of this app, because it's not that great. It's a bit slow. It has only 14 history of data, and in the next month, there will be some companies who will build custom solutions to help clients monitor and size their capacities more precisely.
And did you have such situation when you measured the capacity unit and just saw that, okay, F8 will be enough, and then you switched to F8 and it wasn't enough?
It can happen because the same workload is supposed to consume more or less the same amount of capacity units over time, but this is not a precise exact rule, right? And also the behavior in the capacities, you also have front-end operations, which by design are unpredictable, because your users can consume more reports, you can do heavy DAX calculations, which also consume capacity units. So by design, it's not exact science, right? So this is why you also need to, when you make your predictions, you need to put some comfort zone in order to make sure.
As Phil said, experiment.
Yes.
It's very, very important. Experiment, because the cycle of experimentation is very short. So, and we need to consider that, or oversize and pay for it with a reserve instance. And sometimes we saw that. I have a client who choose to don't experiment. So they just take a F128 just to be sure that everything will be okay. They don't want issue or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
it's probably also important to consider multiple capacities as well.
Yeah.
So you could have a very small one, which is just for development, then even potentially testing. And then you have a separate one, which can still be also small, but that's dedicated to production. And that way, because your production environment is much more likely to have consistent patterns that you can observe using the capacity metrics app. When does it peak? How long does it stay at peak? When does it, go off? And then you've got a much more stable usage to help predict what should the production capacity be. Because it probably doesn't matter so much with development. So that's something to consider too. So,
yes. Maybe a question for the Fabric Cat team. Are you involved in sizing for very big customers where it's not so easy to experiment, to maybe having some templates or things. I know there's a calculator in preview, but for very big customers with, as you said, many capacities, many way to organize and to do the capacity planning, is there someone in the team that is specialized on that?
No, probably not. And I actually think customers do a better job than we would.
Okay.
Because, I was at a customer today, they probably have about 20 or 30 capacities, and some of them can be quite large. So they know the usage, they know the kind of calculations they want to run, they know their data, and they've got that history. And the more history you have, the more predictable and easier it is to sort of know when they've got a new project coming on, can they fit it on one of their existing capacities, or do they need to get a new one? What size should it be? So often the customer, for something like that, is a lot better at us, because there's so many variables that we don't know about when it comes to the way each customer is going to use their data and what kind of calculations they run.
Yes.
So
have you tried the calculator, fabric calculator?
I haven't, no. I've heard about the mythical calculator for many, many years, but maybe I should give it a go. But I'd say it will give you a good enough estimation, I'm pretty sure, because we can probably at least look at our telemetry and say anonymously how many unique users are on a given capacity and what size it is and how it performs. So we can sort of have a band where it probably gives you a pretty good starting point. And for a lot of customers, that will be enough. But there will inevitably be outliers where people, it is either too under or too over what they actually end up themselves doing. So I'm sure it's not too. It's pretty good. So
yes, you said you had a funny story about the capacity metrics app.
Yes. So when I mentioned that everyone in my team runs from DAX, it's actually not just the CAT team. About 4 years ago, I got contacted by someone internally, and they said, "Oh, I'm working on the capacity metrics app." It was an earlier version. I don't know if you remember it. It was quite different, and the performance was awful. And I had to help him optimize the model and optimize the DAX. And there was a contractor, and he happened to be leaving at the end of that week. He said, "Oh, would you mind just taking over this app? Because I have to go do some other work." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, how hard can that be?" And there was one other guy who was the project manager of it. And he said, "Oh, we're planning to do a new version of this report because this current one's not very popular. It doesn't work very well. It's got a whole bunch of backing problems. Do you want to help me out doing this new capacity metrics app?" And I thought foolishly at the time, yeah, how hard can it be? Maybe a couple of weeks at most. And I think 5 or 6 months later, I was still working with on it, and it's sort of the one that's still there today. I managed to finally get myself out, but one of the challenges was the PM at the time. He was having lots of conversations with customers, which is good. But then he'd come back to me and say, "What I asked you to do yesterday, scratch that. We're going to do it a completely another way." So I'd sort of build that, and then the next day he'd come back and go, "No, scratch that. We're not going to do something different again." I had to tell him.
Welcome to consulting.
Exactly. I had to tell him, just stop talking to customers. We've got to get this out. And my goal was to actually put something out that just didn't suck, because the previous one was awful. Everyone hated it and complained. And I thought, if I can put something out that it lasts a couple of months, maybe we can get people who know what they're doing and make something look really good, come in and take over. But I think it's still there. Finally, when I did leave, they hired a group of about 6 or 7 developers, plus a dedicated just to that report. And it slowed right down. And it was fun. I really, really enjoyed it. And it is quite a buzz when I am on a customer call and they bring up their capacity metrics app to talk about, the charts and the data, etc. I remember, in my spare room coding away at 10 o'clock at night on that Cousteau query, and I've never written Cousteau before either.
Yeah, because it's a CustoDB database. It's quite complex. The
architecture.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole lot that needs to happen around security to make sure that customer A can just never see data that doesn't belong to them, and
Of course.
vice versa. So we take that sort of things very, very seriously. But I foolishly said, how hard can it be? I'll help out, thinking it might have just been a short job, but it wasn't. It was less complex.
What you say is very interesting to mention that Microsoft ears to customer, to have ideas, new things to fix, new features. But the difficulty for an editor, for a vendor, is to translate that into a product backlog and to have a product management. Because if you listen too much, you change everything, like you said, you change everything every day, but you have to find the right product, and I think it's very difficult. Plus security, architecture, scalability, millions of customers over the world. So I think it's pretty hard to manage.
And that is actually the crux of what my team does. So when we say CAT, it stands for Customer Advisory Team. And that's all we do, is we talk to customers and we listen, and we actually act on their behalf. We kind of lobby on behalf of particularly large enterprise customers. But we have to synthesize, we have to filter out noise, because you might have someone who says, I absolutely need this feature. And when you sit down and dive into it, perhaps they don't necessarily need it. Maybe another solution might be quite good. But if customer A is saying, I need this feature, and then another customer is asking for the same feature, and another customer is asking for the same feature, we make sure that the prioritization team get that information. And that's probably one of the reasons why Power BI has been so successful, because we took a customer first approach and didn't build what we think they need, a whole bunch of features that they don't necessarily use. I'm sure we're still guilty of that. But we actually listened to customers and made Power BI work the way they needed to. And that's why it really went quite viral at a lot of organizations, much to the upset of the IT departments, who blinked one day and all of a sudden everyone was using Power BI, and it was just too late. So,
may I have one customer request?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because my company works mainly in Ukraine. I'm Ukrainian.
Sure.
Yes, and the new version of Power BI service, I think it's almost a year. It lacks the font in Cyrillic, because it just replaces for Times New Roman. So when you see it, it looks really awful.
Remind me after, and I'll take a note. And
it's just a simple thing.
It takes tomorrow morning.
No, we have a feedback tool. I'll make sure it goes into our feedback tool, and then if other people are asking for it, it helps. It definitely helps. Sounds like a perfectly reasonable request. I'm sure we do it for other languages, because I've been lucky enough in my role to travel a lot. So I'll go to places like Japan or the Philippines or Singapore. Certainly, they've got quite different language requirements. So we either do it badly for everyone, or we do it well for some, and it doesn't sound like we're not doing it so well for.
It's just a question of font, but it's a good translation and everything, but it really. I work in English, but actually for some customers, they oops.
Yeah.
I have a bit more general question. Do you have a secret algorithm that you can tell us, maybe more one-to-one, and how we should put the idea, or how we can push the idea to having implemented first? Do we need to contact all our friends and to vote for the idea?
Well, as you probably know, with Power BI, we have this community tool called ideas.powerbi.com, and I think it's now called ideas.fabric.
Yeah.
And anyone can go and place an idea and vote it up.
Yeah.
There are some that have probably been in the top 10 for a long, long time. That's not because we don't necessarily want to do them. Maybe they're just quite expensive, quite hard. It's easy to do other things, but we do tick them off. I remember before I started at Microsoft, someone telling me that when we are doing our planning, and I'll tell you a little bit about how that works, 40% of the ideas that generally get done come from ideas.powerbi.com. It's not always number one first, number two second. The other 40% comes from our enterprise customers, so the people that we on CAT converse with. We make sure their voice is heard as well. And the last 20% is our senior leadership, maybe some strategic decisions about where they want to go. They say, we want to perhaps have this feature or this capability added to the product. So we plan in 6 monthly blocks. So they call them semesters, and it typically goes autumn to spring, spring to autumn. So we're actually now, in the next few weeks, doing what we call our semester planning. So all the various feature PMs, the people who own the various parts of what is quite now a big product, they have to look at all these ideas. They go to ideas.powerbi.com or fabric.com. They go to the enterprise equivalent, and they pretty much get a big list like this, but they can only do so much. And they trade, they argue, they spend an awful lot of time in meetings. They have to, everything they want to do, they have to prove. It's almost like an interview scenario. I don't know if you've ever done or heard about people who do PhDs. At the end, they have to actually get, they have to defend their PhD with all these questions. So the feature PMs actually have to, once they've selected what features they want to do, there is another test they have to pass, and then they go and do it. Once we know what we're going to do, we typically publish that in a document called a release wave, certainly the big ticket items. We'll announce them at various big community events like FabCons or Pass or Ignite, etc. Is there a trick to get your idea done? Probably not. Make sure you get it into ideas.com, ideas.powerbi.com or fabric.com. If it's a good one, it'll get voted up. But that still doesn't necessarily guarantee it's going to get done. I think dark mode was there for about 4 or 5 years. Yeah. Finally got ticked off.
What about the totals manager?
There might be something coming in there. Just between us. Yep.
Okay, just between us.
Yep.
Okay. Or you need to work at a larger customer, Alexandre.
Yeah, that's what I understand.
But what is interesting say, is that a very great idea that just pop up, maybe it's 6 months delay just to be considered, planned, developed, and then released. Or maybe sometimes there's something strategic or something that everybody says that it's easy, comes to the quarter. Do you have a revision of the plan of the quarter? Or?
I think things can change, but generally we put a lot of time into semester planning, and as I said, that gets tested very thoroughly. Then it comes down to which items do you do first. So some items we can get out early, some items might come late in the semester, some items might be multi-semester as well, where you have to actually do some part, another part, and so on. But actually I have the real answer. If you want to get your idea into Power BI, create a giant company, spend about $50 million a year on Power BI, and then what you say, what you ask for, probably carries a lot of weight. Simple as that.
Good luck.
But doesn't necessarily guarantee. But,
Yes.
that
How much
probably
was it?
helps.
50 millions?
Billions.
50 million a year or so
billions,
on that's just spending on Power BI. So
Good advice, thank you. So it's been 35 minutes and we still haven't talked about your favorite topic, which is data modeling and DAX.
Okay.
So let's talk about this a bit. So the first question is, so Phil is a real expert in DAX. I don't know if you have had the chance to read his blog. Is it daxtips.com, right?
Dax.tips.
Dax.tips, sorry. He has a really great content, especially I use it a lot for aggregations. I loved your article on aggregations. I use it a lot at my clients. Nowadays, like even yesterday morning, I implemented something that you recommended in your article. So thank you for that. So let's talk about DAX a little bit. The first question is, how much does Fabric impact or not your data modeling strategies? As we know in Power BI, we like to work with a star schema. Mm-hmm. How much does Fabric change that or not? Like, what's your opinion on that?
Absolutely nothing at all. So all of the things we've always recommended as a best practice and a good approach to data modeling do not change. So you mentioned star schema, absolutely. And there's a whole bunch of other smaller things about data types and cardinality and things like that that can make your model successful. One of the things that you really also need to think about is that the less stats, the better. If you've built your data model well, then your measures should be simple. If you're writing DAX measures that have 20 lines, then you're probably doing it wrong. And yes, you probably get the correct result, but you're probably burning far more compute than you need. And you're going to have scalability problems, concurrency problems. If you're ever lucky enough to be in a position where you've got 5,000 users all hitting that report at the same time on a Monday morning. So generally, the less stats, the better. And the way to solve that is follow those standard star schema, and you typically have more success. We have got a, not that. The only thing that's new with Fabric is we've introduced this new storage mode, Direct Lake.
Yes.
And I think another misconception that when we announced Fabric, we also shouted about, hey, we've got this exciting new storage mode that you can use. And some people thought, well, if I use Fabric, therefore I have to use this. And no, that's not true at all.
Just sorry to interrupt for the audience. Can you explain in basic terms what is Direct Lake and what does it change compared to imports?
Okay, well, hopefully you're here tonight because you know Power BI and you're using Power BI. And when you're creating a new model and you're adding tables to it, you have a choice of storage mode. You can either say, I want to have this table to use import mode, which means all the data is cached and loaded into the model, or I can have it run in direct query mode, which means I leave the data in the source, and they both have their own, like the reason why you would choose one over the other just depends on the data volume and other needs, etc. And we have a third storage mode, which is actually a combination of the two, called dual storage mode. So it's not really a new one, it just means that the table can actually operate in both DQ and import based on how you design your model. So with Fabric, we introduced a brand new storage mode that you can choose called Direct Lake. It was originally called see-through mode. That was the project name.
Okay. See-through.
See-through, because what it did, it could see through to the. And at the moment, if you create a model that uses tables that use this new storage mode, every table has to use it. So you can't mix and match. You can't have some tables import, some tables direct lake, and some tables direct query in the same model. With a direct lake model, every table has to be direct lake. But that's going to change. We are going to be introducing the ability to have a model with a direct lake table sitting next to an import table, for example.
So composite models basically inside directly. Not inside, but along with.
Yep. So that, and eventually direct query. And, we're doing. That's a multi-semester type scenario. So what's the difference? What is the main difference? Well, import. If you're using an import table, you can connect to a wide variety of sources. So you can connect to CSV, Excel, Oracle, Teradata, SQL, Google BigQuery, Databricks. You can basically connect to a wide variety of sources. Direct query, there are fewer sources because it needs to be able to connect to a source that has the ability to receive a query, process that query, and deliver results back. You can't do that with a CSV file, unless there's an engine sitting over the top of it, but generally not. Direct Lake only understands one type of data source, nothing else. It has to be delta Parquet. But the benefit of this is when you need to get data into the model, it already knows, it doesn't have to do much to the data. It can pretty much just lift and shift it and drop it in. So if you have a clean, cold model with no data in it whatsoever, and say you need to get 1 billion rows of data in, and maybe if I used import, it might take a couple of hours. If I was to use Direct Lake over the same size data, same column, same everything else, it might take a few seconds. So it's pretty neat. So if you are using import today, and something like the time it takes to refresh data in, and you're managing partitions and you're doing all this, then Direct Lake is quite an attractive proposition. But you need to get your data into that delta Parquet format for you to be able to use it.
Yes.
Now, if you think about import, what does import do? It connects to its source and it says, I need data. Let's say there's a billion rows of data. It'll start streaming the rows. And when it's got, say, 8 million of those rows, it's got a batch of rows, it has to do a lot of work to that. It has to sort of pull it apart, separate the columns, pivot it, compress it, do all sorts of stuff. And at the end of that process, the data is in a very Parquet-like format. So if you think about an import process, 98% of what it's doing is basically taking the data from a variety of sources and turning it into a Parquet format. And right at the very end, it loads it into the model. So with Fabric, what we have now is we're saying, because the core storage format for all of Fabric is Delta Parquet, we know that what we normally do in an import process is being done. It's happened upstream. So when it comes time to, I want to create a new model, brand new model, I want to use data from that table, that table, that table, and people start querying it, it can bring it in super fast, it can just lift and shift it, and it does a little bit of work, but not too much. So again, if you follow best practice, follow the guidance, then you get very good performance at paging the data into the model. Once the data's in the model, it's very similar to an import model when it comes to things like DAX query speed. But otherwise, probably the main benefit is that ability to get data into the model very quickly.
Yes.
So compared to import.
Okay, interesting. And it's still DAX, so if you know
Exactly
DAX,
the same.
it's the same language, and you can work on the web interface. You don't even need Power BI Desktop anymore to, well, now you can edit your models, and to create them and even to edit them, you can use just a web interface. So if you're a startup, for example, and you work on a Mac, now you have no excuse. You can build your direct lake models from the web, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and you can use Tabular Editor and community tools and SSMS, and you can even do it in PowerShell.
Yes.
And in fact, more and more now, you can use Python notebooks to create models and add tables and relationships and measures and refresh it and manage it. So that's pretty cool. But as I said earlier, just because we've got this new option doesn't mean we're saying you must use it. If you've got models today that are perfectly happy using import and direct query, maybe assess, have a look at Direct Lake. And if it's better for you, maybe switch across. We've got migration tools.
Yeah.
But if it's not, keep doing things the way you're doing. If you've got new models to create, some of those models make sense to still use direct query. Others use import only. Others use the combination of import and direct query with aggregation tables, like you just mentioned. Other new items, yeah, absolutely use direct lake. It's just another tool in the toolbox, basically, and it's nice to have it there. We didn't have it 2 years ago. I think a lot of models will use it, but absolutely not every single one.
That's a good tip from you, because sometimes, this is not what I think, but some MVPs and some people say that Microsoft now only promotes direct lake. And you just said that, well, it depends on many factors. It's just another option, but it is not necessarily the default option. Like, you need to assess.
I will be that MVP too. Just not precise, but think that Microsoft is a little bit pushy about Direct Lake. You mentioned earlier that during the semester plan, there's part of the features that come from strategic ideas, from leadership. Is there a plan? Because sometimes when Microsoft is very pushy about feature, it's because there's a larger or long-term plan about that. Is there, and maybe you cannot answer,
Maybe it's NDA. Yeah.
Yes, maybe you cannot answer, but, and I don't have the answer, but is there, if you think about the future, do you think that in 5 or 10 years it will be something that you have the choice when you create the model, or there will be evolutions of the direct lake mode to not to replace but to be the
leader?
Yes, or the best choice when you create a model?
I mean, I think we've got the best engine for analytics and reporting by a long, long way. And I think we're proud of that. And I think we will continue to evolve and develop. Like, I am definitely aware of some things that are coming in a year or two, not 10 years, that I'm pretty excited about, that are going to make already a very, very fast engine, even faster, which is pretty exciting. And actually with Direct Lake, I was blown away when I first saw it. I think it was actually pre-COVID. The main engineer who was developing the idea said, hey, Phil, come and have a look at this. How long do you think it's going to take me to get this data that's on disk into a model? It's like 50 gig or something like that. And I was thinking, yeah, it's going to be a few hours. And he went, what? It's in, it's done. And I was like, whoa. So I was blown away. But no, we've got a lot of ideas coming. And you're right, I can't really say too much about them. Strategically, who knows? I mean, things change so rapidly.
Yes.
2 years ago, could anyone have predicted how dominant all of these Copilot-like features are making certain things a lot better? It's not necessarily making everything better, but there are some things that are now very, very good at, and I could not have predicted that. The main thing is, again, we need to listen. We need to hear with people succeeding with Power BI and finding it useful, and give us hearing that feedback about, hey, wouldn't it be good if it could do such and such? And if a few people are doing that, we agree.
Yeah.
We would love to be able to
So
do that. So
the advice is play with it, experiment Direct Lake, and Microsoft will see with the telemetry, with the customer user routine, we will see if there's something that just change in the choice of the data modeling part in the future. But for the moment, experiment.
30 seconds promotion. Club Fabric. We did a meetup dedicated on this topic. If you go on our YouTube channel, we have a meetup where we compare import mode and Direct Lake on the same data, and we compare the performance, what are the features available or not. It's available on our YouTube channel, so just feel free to check.
Who in the room has not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the LinkedIn page? You are all subscribed?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, maybe a question, if we stay on this topic, without sharing NDA content, but did you have recently a client who implemented Direct Lake, and what was the reason, what were the use cases, why did they choose Direct Lake over import, without necessarily going too much into the details, but just, yeah.
And what is the outcome?
Yeah.
well, plenty of people are using it.
Okay.
Because I can look at the telemetry about how many models there are, and again, it's got that shape that just keeps going up and up and up. I think the larger organisations are slower to move. So I'm dealing with a lot of multinationals that are in the middle of POCs.
Yes.
And because typically quite a lot of those BI teams, they're only executing today what they were planning 12 months ago.
Yeah.
And this is still very new. So, and I think big companies are taking different approaches. Some are saying, hey, we've got this little thing over here, let's try that on Direct Lake. Others are a bit more ambitious and say, this other much bigger model that we're frustrated with import, would love to see what it might look like under a Direct Lake world. And I have been involved in quite a few of these POC conversations, and some of them I've said, look, realistically, the way you use your data and the way your calculations work and the size of the data, I don't think you should use Direct Lake. I think you should use a different approach. And they started me saying, no, we want to use Direct Lake. So I say, okay, let's just make two versions and you decide. So I'm learning as well. But there have been some situations where they it has made more sense to stick with a more traditional approach.
Like import, I guess.
Yeah, or direct query and import, hybrids, composite models. Aggregations, absolutely. That will give you the best query performance.
By the way, we don't have the principle of aggregations yet in Direct Lake.
Not even for import.
Yeah, you're right.
You can do some clever things with shadow tables, etc., but out of the box, you can't.
Right.
Yeah, and
you need to mix.
And that's sad for me because there are plenty of companies who might have 20 billion rows in import because they've got a really big capacity, and it would be great to have some egg tables with a few million rows in the same model. So, yeah, I've been banging on that for a while internally. So,
are there any questions in the audience, or maybe live? I don't know if we have checked online. Okay, about this DAX data modeling, Direct Lake. Okay.
I have a more general question. I found what you said earlier was a bit interesting for me, so I wanted to ask a question about in what ways does Microsoft Fabric improve the collaboration between data engineers, data analysts, data engineers, analysts, and business users, and also in how does it impact the overall data-driven making decisions process?
Okay. For me, one of the really powerful features of Fabric was separating the storage from the compute layer, because most of the engines we already had, and a lot of customers would come to us and say, hey, you know, you've got this data warehousing engine over here, and you've got pipelines over here, and if I want to do machine learning, it's over here, and they don't really play nicely with each other. I've got to provision this, it's all separate, I've got different people doing all these sorts of things. So before Fabric, which is actually not that long ago, even if I was doing ETL work, and perhaps I wanted to get some machine learning sentiment analysis added to it, you know, I'd have to export data and take it over to my person who does data science, and they would do some work, and then they'd give it back to me, and I'd have to put it in, but it wasn't really automatic, you know. So now having the storage layer common to all the various engines, it means when data lands inside Fabric, it's in the same place that everyone's got access to. So your data scientist can just go, oh, just give me access to it, and I'll add some columns. And then you can have the code and you can run it over and over again, or whatever you like. You know, the warehousing people can do whatever they like to do with layered approaches, you know, bronze, silver, gold, or load, stage, persist, etc., all the way through to the getting it ready. And of course, the end user, when they look at the report, if they're in direct lake mode, for example, that is looking through, it's doing see-through to exactly the same table that everyone else has got access to. But previously, you know, the SQL engine, the data was proprietary, it was locked away inside SQL, and the only way you could access that data was if you connected to the SQL engine and queried it. You know? But now, because the data is centralized, it's so much faster and simpler and easier for people with different specialities that just get in, do what they need, or look at it, or do some work. And it's a much quicker end-to-end process, I think, now with Fabric. Especially the fact that you don't even have to provision lots of different things. You know, if you have a capacity and you need a pipeline, you just go new pipeline or new this. I think when you hit the new button and you look at all the artifacts that you can create, it's quite overwhelming. Yeah. You know, that's why we had this attempt at doing personas, which I don't necessarily think we got quite right. But I think that end-to-end development, because of the separation of the storage, and we've gone for this common storage, has a lot of unintended benefits about just speeding up the process and allowing more people to get involved, and not having to do the separation, exporting and importing, and automation is a lot easier. So, because you have got an end-to-end data platform, whether you choose to use it all of it, it's up to you. But if you do, it's got everything you need to run a corner shop right up to a big enterprise. So,
which is interesting.
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Cool.
I would also add that all these different jobs, they work on the same portal, the same interface, the same place. Like, you don't need to go to the Azure portal, you don't need to go to your Python editor. Like, everything is at the same place with the same interface. And as you said, you can easily switch between different modes and different kinds of data jobs. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah. And what I like to explain is, for me, the magic on the market of Fabric is what you said both, and it's in the one slide that presents all the engine and one lake and great. It's at the bottom. It's written unified architecture, so you don't care about the engine where you query the data. The data is on one lake, and you just consume it with the engine you want, and unified experience. So there's also a unified billing model that can answer some capacity question. But I love that word unified, and that made the difference of the platform for the competition.
Yeah, I'm kind of used to it now. And I do build little mini projects myself, prototypes, examples, and demos, and it is pretty straightforward to do. If I tried to do that using the old way before Fabric, I'd probably quickly get frustrated and annoyed because everything is just in a much more fragmented way that previously I probably didn't know any better. But now that I've had the opportunity to work in a more integrated way, I think going back to doing things outside Fabric, I probably would get quickly frustrated, especially if I was trying to do everything end to end.
Yeah, data engineering, notebooks and stuff. It was not accessible
Yeah.
before if you were coming from the pure Power BI world, I would say.
Or just even storage. Previously, if you had to put data in Azure, you'd have to figure out what kind of blob storage and how do you authenticate, and you give someone access. You've got passwords and secret keys and things that are often quite hard to find how to set up. Whereas with Fabric, once it's in, it just works.
One lake.
Yep.
One lake.
Okay, Jean-Pierre, just before this meetup, we had a few conversations on WhatsApp, and you wanted to ask a question to Philippe about, there are sometimes some criticism of Fabric online, and Jean-Pierre, you had a question.
Yes, and it's not me that asked the question. It's just to figure out, because there's in the market a lot of, and we can call them the haters, and we often heard that it's not finished, it's not mature enough.
You're talking about Fabric, right?
Yes. Fabric is not finished, not mature enough. There's a lot of bugs. It doesn't work. Blah blah blah. Blah.
It's not stable.
It's not stable. So the only thing that is true is that Fabric is young in the market compared to other tools. But what is the answer you have? Do you keep? Are you zen and you just ask? It happens, or what is the? How do you deal with people that thinks that Fabric is not finished, for example?
Okay, well, I'm not going to lose any sleep at night. But certainly the engines that we've added to Fabric, we didn't build from scratch for Fabric. They're very mature, very stable engines that have been around for a long time. So the data warehousing engines, dates back to big MPP appliances from a long time ago. Power BI runs on analysis services. Again, we didn't write that for Fabric. It's a mature, strong engine. The main thing we did with Fabric was this separation of storage and compute, but the compute engines themselves are still the robust enterprise engines that have been around, and often best of breed. They will be at the top or near the top of the various speed tests that people are doing, etc. But it has been a big change. Having the UI interface, simplifying that, hasn't gone just perfectly well. Nothing like that ever does. It was ambitious. It's very big, but we've got a big team working on it. And I think what you find is if you're using Fabric and just even compare back a few months, it's always getting better, getting faster, but I think most of the quirks are around the user interface, not necessarily the actual engines themselves. The Custo engine, it's one of the best kept secrets of Microsoft. The whole company of Microsoft, all the telemetry is running on the Custo engine, and we've been able to, again, we didn't build it from scratch for Fabric, we just took all the good work that's already taken place over many, many years and adapted it so that it can understand this Delta Parquet format. But when you're actually running in those engines, you're typically still running best of breed for that particular engine. So it's going to keep getting better. We'll probably make the odd mistake. That's just what happens. But we're all passionate about it. We certainly like the idea, and I think in a year's time it'll look probably different again for the better.
Yeah, so you encourage people to be optimistic and not pessimistic, because the whole company is working to have a better product week after week, month after month.
Yeah, and I think if you have a conversation with one of these haters that you described, and if you really dive down into why they might be saying that, it possibly isn't genuine criticism. Like, I'm not saying Fabric's perfect, but I think that the core engines themselves are actually very, very good engines. So if you do want to run your compute jobs in them, they're pretty good. We didn't build any. I think the only one we created from scratch was Flow or Automate. I think that was probably one of the new ones, but that's only actually quite a small one compared to the main engines, the Spark, the data warehousing, and the analysis services like Power BI.
And even Direct Lake, it's a smart reuse of how that feedback works, and it's adapted to. I agree with you. And I would also say to be patient, because let's remember the beginning of Power BI.
Yeah.
Like we all agree that today Power BI is a great tool. It's very stable. It's very mature.
Yes, you can say the best tool.
I personally think it has destroyed the market. But anyway, at the beginning, it was not the case. We were not the leaders, and there were some bugs. And there were a lot of core features missing. I don't know if you remember. For example, a few years ago, you had to be in edit mode to be able to connect to a data set and do self-service BI. So there was this kind of things which really didn't allow Power BI to be used as a real semantic model. Now it's no longer the case. It's very stable and mature. And I'm not working at Microsoft, but I am pretty sure that in the next years, Fabric will follow the same path. And it's also because the people who are now working on Fabric are more or less, I'm talking about the management team, they are the same people who made Power BI a great success. So I think we can be pretty confident on that.
Yeah, and they've been rewarded. The senior leadership that developed and grew Power BI so successfully now run all of Azure Data.
Yeah.
And what used to be a couple of hundred people is now 8, 9, 10,000 people in the team under those. But I remember Power BI in the early days, before I worked for Microsoft. It was about 9 years ago. I was working for a company in New Zealand, and we were assessing BI tools. I think it might have been Looker, it might have been Tableau, and Power BI. And it was my job to try and pick the tool. And I went around the business and I talked to the various stakeholders and said, what do you need in a BI tool? What do you need? What do you need? And we got lists and we tested all the tools and we scored each of the tools. And Power BI was one of the lowest at that time. There were lots of things missing that the stakeholders needed. But you could kind of tell that it was the start of something quite good. Microsoft had made a couple of attempts at BI tools in the past, Performance Point, Crescent in Excel, and they sort of didn't really go anywhere. But Power BI, you knew that it was going to be quite good. So I stuck my neck out and I said to the company, I think we should go with Power BI, despite it missing these features. I think they're going to come. I had no idea. So what I did was, every time they did a release, which was every week, I'd go into the JavaScript web code and I found a way that you could just edit variables to actually unlock features. You could see that often when they were adding a new feature, they would add the UI but turn it off. And what I could do was go and change the JavaScript and go, oh, I can see that menu's coming and it's got everything I need. It didn't work because the backend wasn't complete. And I was taking screenshots and tweeting, going, hey, I think this is coming. And I got a call one day from this American accent, say, oh, Phil, how's it going? This was out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it. I had this pleasant conversation. It was Chuck, was the person. I've never heard of him met before. And at the end of the conversation, he goes, oh, yeah, by the way, how are you getting this, how are you doing these screenshot tweets? Because I've got MVPs in Australia complaining, probably Matt Ellington. And so I explained to him that I need to find out to say to my stakeholders, yes, this feature's coming. So I'm going in and finding a way to maybe spot some clues. And as part of that, I was like, sharing. He goes, I think we need to make you an MVP. Because when you're an MVP, you have to sign agreements to say, I can't talk about private things. So I, in a roundabout way, became an MVP. And as part of being an MVP, I got to know people. I went to one summit and I met some people, and then eventually I got a job, because what I was also doing was writing DAX-based games. To develop my skill in DAX. I wasn't doing classic Power BI, I was developing Blackjack, Minesweeper, and a bunch of different games, and in DAX. And I think that got me hired because the people who actually run analysis services didn't like me abusing their engine, because they were like, that's not what it's for, you shouldn't be doing that. So we're going to hire you to shut you down and keep you busy. And That's how I actually ended up on this chair in front of you tonight.
So what are you working on currently? Just to know your next job.
Like a game.
No, because if you do something, you change your job because Microsoft proposed you something. So what are you working on?
I still don't fully understand.
Yeah, it was job.
Okay, yeah, cool. No, unfortunately, they keep me too busy, so I'd love to blog more.
Yeah, block you. You
Yes.
cannot share anything or
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Yeah, nothing too crazy.
Okay.
And you're too busy now with large customers, many requests, right?
Yeah, because like I say, no one else wants to do the DAX. It all falls on my plate, which I really enjoy. I actually do quite enjoy. And being in New Zealand, my time zone works for me because when I'm awake, everyone else is asleep. So it gives me an opportunity to spend time without too many distractions and sometimes solve some very challenging, fun things. When it's Monday in New Zealand, it's Sunday everywhere else, so I get a clear day there. And of course, when it's my Friday afternoon, everyone else is still Thursday, and I kind of it's
Good tips.
yeah. So if you want to relocate to New Zealand,
Yeah.
When I open an office now.
yeah, if you work on an international organization like Microsoft, it can play to your favor.
Okay.
So
We are out of time and we will just stop the stream. But if you want to ask a question directly to Phil or discuss about fabric, about DAX, about modeling, you are lucky because you are there. And we will go to the network.
And we have a few.
Yes, we have a few drinks for the cocktail. So it's time to say goodbye to every people online and to applause and thank you, Phil, for